The air was thick with the weight of things unsaid, and Ethan's heart pounded like it was trying to break free. He stood outside the old sauna on the edge of Willow Creek, a small town in upstate New York, watching Jake's broad shoulders disappear into the steam-filled doorway. Why had he followed him here? To this place where secrets seemed to cling to the walls like damp heat. Ethan's sneakers scuffed the gravel as he hesitated, his breath catching in the chilly autumn dusk. Jake, his best friend since high school, had invited him to this rundown spa with a grin and a casual, "You gotta loosen up, man." But Ethan knew better. Every moment with Jake was a tightrope walk between friendship and something deeper, something he'd never dared name. The sauna was a relic, tucked behind a gas station and a diner that served greasy burgers to truckers. Its faded sign promised relaxation and renewal. But to Ethan, it felt like a crucible. He'd spent years burying his feelings for Jake, the All-American quarterback with a laugh that could light up a room and a girlfriend who wore his varsity jacket like a trophy. Yet here he was, trailing Jake into a place where the heat stripped away pretense, wondering if he was chasing a dream or a disaster. Inside, the air was heavy, scented with cedar and something faintly metallic. Ethan adjusted his towel, his skin prickling as he spotted Jake across the room, sprawled on a wooden bench, eyes closed, oblivious to the storm raging in Ethan's chest. The other men in the sauna, older, weathered, silent, faded into the haze, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. What am I doing here? He wondered. But the answer was as clear as it was terrifying. He was here because Jake had asked him to come, and Ethan had never learned how to say no. Their friendship had always been a strange alchemy of ease and ache. Jake was the sunbright, effortless, magnetic. Ethan was the shadow, quieter, always a step behind, sketching landscapes in his notebook while Jake tossed a football or charmed a crowd. They'd grown up together, shared secrets over late-night bonfires, and survived the claustrophobia of small-town life. But Ethan's secret was different. It wasn't the kind you whispered over beers. It was the kind that could unravel everything. As the steam curled around them, Jake opened his eyes and caught Ethan staring. "What's with you, man?" he said, his voice light but curious. "You look like you're about to bolt." Ethan forced a smile, his throat tight. "Just not used to this heat," he lied. But Jake's gaze lingered, searching, like he could see the truth Ethan was too scared to voice. The sauna was quiet except for the hiss of steam and the occasional drip of water on hot stones. Ethan's mind raced. He'd read about places like this, spaces where men went to escape, to connect, to be something other than what the world expected. Willow Creek wasn't exactly a haven for openness, though. The town's church signs preached love but practiced judgment, and Ethan had seen what happened to kids who didn't fit the mold. He'd learned to keep his head down, to let his sketches speak the truths his voice couldn't. But Jake was different. Jake, who'd once punched a guy for calling Ethan a slur in 10th grade. Jake, who'd stayed up all night with him when Ethan's mom left town for good. Jake, who was straight, engaged to Sarah, and so far out of reach it hurt to look at him. Yet here they were, half naked in a sauna, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. "Yo, Ethan," Jake said, sitting up, his towel slipping slightly. "You ever feel like you're hiding something, but you don't even know what it is?" The question hit Ethan like a punch. He froze, his pulse hammering. Was Jake fishing, or was this just another of his random musings? Ethan swallowed, his voice barely steady. "What do you mean?" Jake shrugged, his eyes distant. "I dunno. Like, you're living one life, but there's another one inside you, fighting to get out." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Probably just the heat messing with my head." Ethan wanted to press, to ask what Jake meant, but fear clamped his mouth shut. Instead, He nodded, his heart screaming words he'd never say. The sauna door creaked open, and a new figure stepped in, a man in his 30s. Lean, with a quiet confidence that shifted the room's energy. He glanced at Ethan, then Jake, and something in his eyes made Ethan's stomach twist. It wasn't desire. Not exactly. But recognition. Like he'd seen this story play out before. Ethan looked away, his cheeks burning. But the man's presence lingered. A reminder that this place held more than just heat. As the minutes ticked by, Ethan felt the walls closing in, not the wooden ones, but the ones he'd built around himself. He wanted to tell Jake everything, to spill the truth and let it burn. But what would that do? Ruin their friendship? Push Jake away for good? Or worse, what if Jake didn't care at all? The thought was a knife, sharp and cold. Jake stood, stretching, his skin glistening with sweat. Come on, let's hit the cold plunge. Wake you up a bit. He grinned, and Ethan followed, because that's what he always did. But as they stepped out of the sauna, the stranger's gaze followed them, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just crossed a threshold he couldn't uncross. The cold plunge was a shock, like diving into a frozen lake. Ethan gasped as the icy water bit his skin, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. Jake laughed beside him, splashing water with a playful shove. Told you it'd wake you up, he said, his voice echoing in the tiled room. Ethan forced a laugh, but his chest ached not from the cold, but from the weight of everything he wasn't saying. They sat on the edge of the plunge pool, towels draped over their shoulders, the air between them thick with unspoken questions. Ethan stole glances at Jake, his best friend's profile sharp against the flickering fluorescent light. How could someone so familiar feel so far away? Jake's words from the sauna lingered in Ethan's mind, another life inside you, fighting to get out. What did that mean? Was Jake struggling too? Or was Ethan reading too much into a throwaway line? The sauna complex was a maze of dim corridors and heavy air, its walls stained with years of steam and secrets. Ethan had heard rumors about this place, whispers of late-night encounters, of men meeting in shadows. He'd dismissed them as small-town gossip. But now, with Jake so close, the rumors felt like a pulse beneath the surface. Ethan wondered, what if I'm not the only one hiding something? Jake leaned back, his hands braced on the tile. You ever think about leaving Willow Creek? He asked suddenly, his tone quieter than usual. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Like, for good. Jake nodded, staring at the water. Yeah. Just starting over somewhere. Somewhere you can be whoever you want. The question hung between them, heavy and fragile. Ethan's heart raced. Was this Jake's way of reaching out? Or was he just restless? Willow Creek was a cage, its churches, its traditions, its unspoken rules. Ethan had dreamed of escape, of cities where he could be himself without fear. But leaving meant leaving Jake, and that was a loss he couldn't imagine. I've thought about it, Ethan admitted, his voice low. But it's not that easy. People here, they expect things. Jake turned to him, his eyes searching. What do they expect from you, Ethan? The question was soft, but it cut deep. Ethan wanted to say, they expect me to be someone I'm not. They expect me to hide. But instead, he shrugged. You know, the usual. Get a job, settle down, fit in. Jake's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw something: anger. Maybe, or frustration. Screw fitting in, Jake said, his voice sharp. What if you don't want what they want? Ethan's breath caught. Was Jake talking about himself? Or had he somehow glimpsed Ethan's truth? Before Ethan could respond, Jake stood, shaking water from his hair. Let's head back to the sauna. I'm freezing. Back in the heat, The stranger from earlier was still there, sitting quietly, his eyes tracking them as they entered. Ethan felt exposed, like the man could see every thought he'd ever buried. Jake seemed oblivious, settling onto a bench and closing his eyes again. But Ethan couldn't relax. The air felt charged, like a storm was brewing. The stranger spoke, his voice low and steady. "You two from around here?" Ethan flinched, but Jake answered easily. "Yeah, born and raised." "You?" The man smiled, a knowing edge to it. "Just passing through. This place, it's got a way of bringing things to the surface, doesn't it?" Ethan's stomach twisted. Was that a warning or an invitation? Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Guess so. Kinda makes you think too much." The stranger's eyes flicked to Ethan, and for a split second, Ethan felt he not just noticed, but understood. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He looked away, his hands trembling under his towel. As the conversation faded, Ethan's mind spun. He wanted to ask Jake what he'd meant earlier, about living another life. He wanted to know if Jake ever felt trapped, the way Ethan did. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he watched the steam curl, his thoughts a tangle of hope and fear. Then Jake spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're my best friend, Ethan. You know that, right?" The words were simple, but they hit Ethan like a tidal wave. He nodded, unable to speak, his heart screaming, "I'm more than that, Jake. I always have been." The sauna door opened again, and Sarah's voice cut through the haze. "Jake, you in here?" Ethan's world tilted. Sarah, Jake's fiancée, wasn't supposed to be here. Jake sat up, his expression shifting to something unreadable. "Yeah, babe. Over here," he called, and Ethan felt the walls of his heart close and tighter. Sarah's presence was like a cold wind in the sauna's heat. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the fluorescent light of the hall, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun. "Didn't know you were bringing Ethan," she said, her tone light, but edged with something Ethan couldn't place surprise. Maybe. Or suspicion. Jake grinned, standing to greet her. "Yeah, figured he needed to chill out for once." He slung an arm around her, casual as always, but Ethan caught the brief glance Jake threw his way, like he was checking for something. Ethan's stomach churned. Did Jake know? The thought was a splinter, lodging deeper with every second. Sarah settled on the bench beside Jake, her towel wrapped tightly, her smile polite but distant. Ethan felt like an intruder, his presence suddenly too big, too noticeable. He wanted to disappear into the steam, to erase the longing that clung to him like damp air. But he stayed, because leaving would mean admitting something was wrong. The stranger from earlier watched silently, his expression unreadable. Ethan avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the beads of sweat rolling down his own arm. The sauna was supposed to be a place of release, but it felt like a pressure cooker, every glance and word adding to the tension. "So, Ethan," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "You don't strike me as a sauna guy. What brought you here?" Her question was innocent, but it landed like an accusation. Ethan's throat tightened. "Jake brought me here," he wanted to say. "I'd follow him anywhere." Instead, he mumbled, "Just trying something new." Jake chuckled, but it sounded strained. He's always sketching in that notebook of his. Figured he could use a break from all that brooding. Sarah laughed, but her eyes stayed on Ethan, searching, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Ethan's skin prickled. Did she suspect something? Had she seen the way he looked at Jake? The conversation shifted to small talk Sarah's job at the local library, Jake's plans for the weekend, but Ethan barely heard it. His mind was a storm of questions. Why had Jake invited him here? Why had he asked about hiding? About living another life? And why was Sarah here now? Her presence a reminder of the life Jake was building, a life that didn't include Ethan the way he wanted. The stranger stood, stretching, and headed for the door. As he passed Ethan, he paused, his voice low. Sometimes you gotta say it out loud, kid, or it'll eat you alive. Ethan's heart stopped. The man didn't look back, just slipped out, leaving Ethan reeling. Was it that obvious? Could everyone see the truth he'd spent years hiding? Jake noticed the exchange, his brow furrowing. What did he say? Ethan shook his head, forcing a smile. Nothing. Just, weird guy. But Jake's frown deepened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw something in Jake's eyes, concern. Maybe. Or something heavier. Sarah stood, adjusting her towel. I'm gonna hit the steam room. You guys coming? Jake nodded, but Ethan hesitated. I'll catch up, he said, needing a moment to breathe, to think. Sarah shrugged and left, but Jake lingered, his gaze fixed on Ethan. You okay, man? Jake asked, his voice soft. Ethan nodded, but the lie felt like sand in his mouth. Jake didn't move, his eyes searching Ethan's face. You'd tell me if something was up, right? The question was so earnest, so raw, that Ethan almost broke. He wanted to spill everything, to tell Jake he'd loved him since they were 16, that every smile, every touch, was a wound and a lifeline. But Sarah's laughter echoed from the hall, and Ethan swallowed the truth. Yeah, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'd tell you. Jake clapped him on the shoulder, the touch burning through Ethan's skin. And then he was gone, following Sarah. Ethan sat alone, the sauna's heat pressing against him, his heart a tangle of longing and fear. He thought about the stranger's words, say it out loud, or it'll eat you alive. But what would happen if he did? Would Jake laugh it off? Pull away? Hate him? The possibilities were a labyrinth, each path leading to a different kind of loss. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing, but the heat only amplified his panic. When he finally stood, his legs felt unsteady, like the ground was shifting beneath him. He wandered the sauna's corridors, passing other patrons, men who moved with quiet purpose, their glances heavy with meaning. Ethan felt out of place, like he was trespassing in a world he didn't understand. But he kept walking, drawn by the need to find Jake, to see him, to know if there was any chance at all. Ethan found Jake in the steam room, sitting alone, his head tilted back against the tiled wall. Sarah was nowhere in sight, and the absence felt like a gift and a curse. The steam was thicker here, clouding the air, making every breath heavy. Ethan hesitated at the door, his heart pounding. Why am I doing this? He thought, but his feet carried him forward, toward Jake, toward the truth he couldn't keep running from. Jake opened his eyes as Ethan sat beside him, the bench warm beneath them. Where's Sarah? Ethan asked, his voice barely cutting through the hiss of steam. Jake shrugged, his expression unreadable. She went to grab some water. Said she'd be back. He paused, then added, You didn't answer my question earlier. You sure you're okay? Ethan's throat tightened. Jake's concern was a lifeline, but it was also a trap. If he said too much, he'd lose everything. If he said too little, he'd lose himself. He stared at the steam, watching it curl like ghosts. I'm fine, he lied, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Jake shifted, leaning closer, his shoulder brushing Ethan's. The touch was electric, and Ethan fought the urge to pull away or lean in. You're a terrible liar, Jake said, his tone half teasing, half serious. Come on, man. It's me. What's going on? Ethan's mind raced. He could feel the words rising, the ones he'd buried for years. I love you. I've always loved you. But they were stuck, lodged behind a wall of fear. Instead, he said, you ever feel like you're not who everyone thinks you are? It was the closest he'd ever come to the truth, and it felt like stepping off a cliff. Jake went still, his eyes fixed on Ethan. For a moment, the steam room was silent except for their breathing. Then Jake spoke, his voice low. All the time. Ethan's heart stopped. He turned, meeting Jake's gaze, and saw something there: vulnerability. Maybe. Or something deeper. What do you mean? Ethan asked, echoing Jake's earlier question. Jake looked away, his jaw tight. I don't know. Just, sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part. The quarterback. The fiancé. The guy everyone expects to have it all figured out. But what if I don't? His words were raw, unguarded, and they hit Ethan like a wave. Was Jake saying what Ethan thought he was saying? Or was this just the heat talking? Before Ethan could respond, the door opened, and Sarah's voice broke the moment. There you are, she said, her tone bright but strained. Jake's expression shifted, the vulnerability gone, replaced by his usual easy smile. Hey, babe, he said, standing to meet her. Ethan felt the air shift, the connection between them severed. Sarah sat between them, her presence a barrier Ethan couldn't cross. She chatted about the sauna, about how it was supposed to detox your body, but Ethan barely listened. His mind was stuck on Jake's words, on the possibility that Jake was struggling with his own truths. Could it be that Jake felt something too? Or was Ethan just seeing what he wanted to see? The steam room grew crowded as another couple entered, their laughter filling the space. Ethan felt suffocated, not by the heat, but by the weight of his own silence. He excused himself, muttering something about needing air, and slipped out into the corridor. The cool tiles under his feet were a relief, but his chest was still tight, his thoughts a tangled mess. He wandered to a quiet corner of the sauna complex, a small lounge with worn leather chairs and a flickering TV. The stranger from earlier was there, sipping a bottle of water, his eyes meeting Ethan's with that same knowing look. Rough night? The man asked, his tone gentle but probing. Ethan hesitated, then sat across from him. Something like that, he said, his voice hoarse. The stranger nodded, like he'd heard it all before. This place has a way of stirring things up, he said. Makes you face what you've been avoiding. Ethan wanted to argue, to say he wasn't avoiding anything, but the lie wouldn't come. What's your name? Ethan asked, needing a distraction. The man smiled. Call me Sam. You. Ethan gave his name, then added, why do you keep saying stuff like that? About facing things. Sam leaned back, his eyes steady. Because I've been where you are. Hiding. Hoping. Hurting. You can't keep it inside forever. Ethan's breath caught. Sam's words were a mirror, reflecting everything Ethan had tried to ignore. He wanted to ask more, to know how Sam had survived his own truth, but footsteps interrupted them. Jake appeared, his towel slung low, his expression unreadable. Ethan, you good? He asked, glancing between Ethan and Sam. Yeah, Ethan said, standing, his heart racing. Just needed a break. Jake's eyes lingered on Sam, a flicker of something jealousy. Crossing his face. Come on, Jake said, his voice tight. Let's get out of here. Ethan followed, but Sam's words echoed in his mind. You can't keep it inside forever. Outside, the night air was sharp, cutting through the haze of the sauna. Ethan and Jake stood by Jake's truck, the gravel crunching under their feet. Sarah had stayed behind to book a massage, leaving them alone for the first time all night. The silence between them was heavy, charged with everything they hadn't said. Ethan's heart pounded, Sam's words looping in his mind. You can't keep it inside forever. Jake leaned against the truck, his hands in his pockets, his eyes on the stars. That guy, Sam, he said, his voice low. What was he talking to you about? Ethan hesitated, his pulse racing. Was Jake jealous? Or just curious? Nothing much, Ethan said, trying to sound casual. Just small talk. Jake's jaw tightened, and he turned to face Ethan. Didn't look like small talk. The words were sharp, almost accusing, and Ethan's stomach twisted. He wanted to ask why it mattered, why Jake cared who he talked to. But the truth was too close to the surface, and Ethan was terrified of what would happen if it spilled out. Instead, he changed the subject. What you said in there, about playing a part, what did you mean? Jake's expression softened, but his eyes were guarded. I don't know, man. Just feeling stuck, I guess. Like I'm supposed to be this guy Sarah's guy, Willow Creek's guy, but sometimes I wonder if that's me. Ethan's heart ached. He wanted to reach out, to tell Jake he didn't have to be anyone but himself. But the words stayed trapped, locked behind years of fear. You're not stuck, Ethan said finally, his voice barely steady. You can be whoever you want. Jake looked at him, his eyes searching, and for a moment, Ethan thought he might say something more. But then Jake laughed, a hollow sound, and clapped Ethan on the back. You're too good for this town, Ethan. Always have been. The words were a compliment, but they felt like a goodbye. They climbed into the truck, the silence between them heavier than ever. As Jake drove through Willow Creek's quiet streets, Ethan stared out the window, his mind a storm of what-ifs. What if he told Jake the truth? What if Jake felt something too? What if he didn't? The questions were a weight, pressing against his chest. When they pulled up to Ethan's apartment, Jake didn't turn off the engine. You sure you're okay? He asked again, his voice soft. Ethan nodded, but his hands were shaking. Yeah. Just tired. Jake studied him, his expression unreadable, then nodded. Get some sleep, man. I'll see you tomorrow. Ethan watched the truck disappear, his heart a knot of longing and regret. He went inside, collapsing onto his couch, the events of the night replaying in his mind. The sauna, Sam's words, Jake's vulnerability, it all felt like a puzzle he couldn't solve. He pulled out his sketchbook, his fingers tracing the lines of a drawing he'd started weeks ago, Jake's face, laughing, lit by firelight. It was the closest he'd ever come to capturing what he felt. The next day, Ethan avoided Jake's texts, needing space to think. He wandered to the diner, hoping the familiarity would ground him. Sam was there, sitting at the counter, a coffee mug in his hands. Ethan hesitated, then sat beside him. You're still here, Ethan said, surprised. Sam smiled. Told you, this town has a way of pulling you in. Or maybe it's the people. He paused, his eyes steady. You talked to your friend yet? Ethan shook his head, his throat tight. I don't know how. Sam nodded, like he'd expected that. It's never easy. But keeping it inside, that's harder. Ethan wanted to argue, to say he could handle it, but the truth was eating him alive. He thought about Jake's words, about feeling stuck, about playing a part. Was it possible Jake was questioning himself too? Or was Ethan just clinging to hope? That night, Jake showed up at Ethan's door, unannounced. You've been weird all day, Jake said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. What's going on? Ethan's heart raced. This was a moment he'd been dreading and dreaming of. He took a breath, Sam's words echoing. Say it out loud. I need to tell you something, Ethan said, his voice trembling. Jake's eyes widened, and for the first time, Ethan saw fear there. Not anger, Not judgment, just fear. And that was enough to make Ethan pause, wondering if he was about to destroy everything. Ethan's apartment was small, cluttered with sketches and half-read books, but it felt suffocating with Jake standing there, waiting. The words Ethan had rehearsed 1,000 times in his head felt impossible now, like trying to hold water in his hands. Jake's presence filled the room, his broad shoulders, his steady gaze, the faint scent of cedar still clinging to him from the sauna. "What is it, Ethan?" Jake asked, his voice softer than usual, almost fragile. Ethan's heart pounded so loud he was sure Jake could hear it. He opened his mouth, but the truth caught in his throat. "I love you. I've loved you for years." The words were there, but saying them felt like jumping into the unknown. Instead, Ethan took a shaky breath. "I'm not who you think I am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. Ethan pushed on, his hands trembling. "I've been hiding something. Something big. And it's killing me to keep it from you." Jake stepped closer, his eyes searching Ethan's face. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. You know that, right?" But Ethan saw the tension in Jake's jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. Was Jake ready for this? Or was he just saying what a best friend was supposed to say? Ethan turned away, staring at the sketch of Jake on his coffee table. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice breaking. "If I tell you, it changes everything." Jake's silence was deafening, and Ethan felt the weight of it, like the air before a storm. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice low. "Ethan, you're scaring me. Just say it." The room spun. Ethan's heart screamed at him to run, to hide. But Sam's words echoed louder. "It'll eat you alive." He turned back to Jake, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "I'm gay," he said, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. "And I'm in love with you. I have been for years." The silence that followed was a void, swallowing everything. Jake's face went blank, his eyes wide, like he'd been hit. Ethan's stomach dropped. He'd done it, said it, and now there was no going back. He braced himself for anger, for rejection, for the end of their friendship. But Jake didn't move. He just stood there, staring, his breath uneven. "You're what?" he said finally, his voice hoarse. Ethan swallowed, his heart shattering. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tumbling out. "I didn't want to tell you like this. I didn't want to tell you at all. But I couldn't keep it in anymore." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of shock and something else, confusion. "Pain. Why didn't you say something sooner?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Ethan laughed, a bitter sound. "Because I was terrified. Because you're with Sarah. Because I didn't want to lose you." Jake's eyes softened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw something like understanding. But then Jake stepped back, his hands raised like he was trying to hold something at bay. I need to think," he said, his voice shaking. "I gotta go." Before Ethan could say anything, Jake was out the door, the slam echoing in the empty apartment. Ethan sank onto the couch, his body trembling, his mind a storm of regret and relief. He'd done it. He'd told the truth. And now he was alone. The next few days were a blur. Jake didn't call, didn't text. Ethan avoided the diner, the sauna, anywhere he might run into him. He threw himself into his sketches, drawing feverishly, trying to capture the ache in his chest. But every line was Jake, his eyes, his smile, the way he'd looked at Ethan in the sauna, like he was seeing him for the first time. Sam found him at the library, where Ethan was hiding in a corner with a stack of art books. "You look like hell," Sam said, sitting across from him. Ethan didn't smile. "I told him," he said, his voice flat. Sam's eyes widened, then softened. How'd it go? Ethan shook his head. He left. Hasn't talked to me since. Sam leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Give him time. Sometimes people need to sit with the truth before they can face it. Ethan wanted to believe him, but the silence from Jake was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. What if he never talks to me again? Ethan asked, his voice breaking. Sam's smile was sad but kind. Then you've still got you. And that's more than you had before you said it out loud. Ethan nodded, but the words felt hollow. He'd spent years building his life around Jake. Without him, who was he? That night, Ethan sat on his balcony, staring at the stars. He thought about Jake's words in the sauna, about living another life. He thought about Sam, about the courage it took to be honest. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to be himself without Jake. But the thought was a knife, and it cut deep. A week passed, each day heavier than the last. Ethan's phone stayed silent, and Willow Creek felt smaller, like the town itself was closing in on him. He went through the motions work at the local art supply store, sketches in his notebook, dinners alone, but the absence of Jake was a hole he couldn't fill. He kept replaying that night in his apartment. Jake's shocked face, the way he'd left without a word. Had Ethan destroyed everything? Or had he finally set himself free? He ran into Sarah at the grocery store, her cart filled with vegetables and a bottle of wine. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Haven't seen you around, she said, her tone polite but distant. Ethan's stomach twisted. Did she know? Had Jake told her? Been busy, he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. She nodded, but as she walked away, she glanced back, and Ethan felt the weight of her unspoken questions. Desperate for distraction, Ethan returned to the sauna. It was a mistake, he knew, but he needed to feel something other than the ache in his chest. The place was quieter tonight, the steam softer, the air less charged. Sam was there, sitting alone, his presence a strange comfort. Back for more punishment? Sam asked, his tone light but knowing. Ethan sat beside him, the heat seeping into his bones. I don't know why I'm here, he admitted. Sam chuckled. Sure you do. You're looking for answers. Ethan shook his head. I already got my answer. He left. Sam's expression softened. Sometimes leaving isn't the answer. It's just the start. They sat in silence, the steam curling around them. Ethan thought about Jake, about the years they'd spent together, the moments that had felt like more than friendship. He thought about the sauna, the way it had stripped away his defenses, forcing him to face himself. How did you do it? Ethan asked finally. How did you tell the truth and keep going? Sam leaned back, his eyes distant. I didn't have a choice. I was in love with someone who couldn't love me back. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how. So I left new city, new life. It hurt like hell, but it was better than hiding. Ethan nodded, the words sinking in. Leaving. Was that his only option now? As he left the sauna, his phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Can we talk? Ethan's heart stopped. He stared at the words, his hands shaking. Was this an olive branch, or the final nail in the coffin? He typed back, sure. Where? The reply came fast, the lake. Tonight. The lake was their place, where they'd spent countless nights as teenagers, skipping stones and dreaming of the future. Ethan arrived first, the water dark and still under the moon. He sat on a fallen log, his sketchbook in his lap, his fingers tracing the outline of Jake's face. When headlights flashed, his stomach lurched. Jake stepped out of his truck, his face pale in the moonlight. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just sat beside Ethan, their shoulders inches apart. The silence was unbearable, but Ethan waited, letting Jake find his words. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice low. "I'm sorry I left like that. I didn't know what to say." Ethan's throat tightened. "You don't have to say anything. I shouldn't have put that on you." Jake shook his head, his eyes fixed on the water. "No, you should have. I just wish you'd told me sooner." Ethan's heart sank. Was this regret? Or something else? "I don't know what I'm doing," Jake said, his voice breaking. "I've got Sarah, this life, this plan, but when you said what you said, it messed me up. Not because I'm mad, but because I don't know what I feel." Ethan's breath caught. Was Jake saying what he thought he was saying? "I'm not. I mean, I don't think I'm like you," Jake continued, his words halting. "But I care about you, Ethan. More than I should. Maybe. And that scares the hell out of me." The confession was a spark, lighting up the darkness. Ethan wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, but he stayed still, afraid to break the moment. They sat there, the lake reflecting the stars, their truths hanging between them. For the first time, Ethan felt like he wasn't alone in his struggle. But what did it mean? Could Jake ever feel the same? Or was this as close as they'd ever get? The lake was quiet, the only sound the gentle lap of water against the shore. Ethan and Jake sat side by side, their silence heavy with possibility. Jake's confession, "I care about you," more than I should, hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting them. Ethan's heart raced, torn between hope and fear. What did Jake mean? Was this a beginning? Or an end? Ethan spoke first, his voice barely steady. "What happens now?" Jake didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed on the water, his hands clasped tightly. "I don't know," he said finally. "I've got Sarah, the wedding, but I can't stop thinking about what you said. About you." Ethan's chest ached. He wanted to ask Jake to choose, to be honest, but he knew it wasn't that simple. Jake wasn't just fighting expectation, she was fighting himself. Ethan had spent years hiding. He knew how hard it was to break free. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," Ethan said, surprising himself with his calm. "But you can't keep running from it." Jake looked at him, his eyes raw with emotion. "I'm not running. I need time." Ethan nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. Time was something he could give, even if it hurt. "Okay," he said, "but I'm not going anywhere." The next weeks were a dance of distance and closeness. Jake started texting again, small things, memes, updates about his job, but he avoided the lake, the sauna, anything too heavy. Ethan let him set the pace, focusing on himself for the first time. He started painting again, bold colors and abstract shapes that felt like freedom. He joined an art group in town, met others who'd faced their own truths. Slowly, he began to see a life beyond Jake. One night, Sam called. He was leaving Willow Creek, heading to Portland for a fresh start. "You should come visit," he said. "There's a whole world out there, Ethan." Ethan smiled, the idea sparking something in him. Maybe he didn't have to stay in Willow Creek forever. Maybe he could build a life where he didn't have to hide. Months later, Jake showed up at Ethan's art show, a small exhibit in a local gallery. Ethan's paintings lined the walls, vivid and raw, each one a piece of his heart. Jake stood in front of a canvas, a swirl of blues and golds, a figure that could be him, or Ethan, or both. "This is incredible," Jake said, his voice soft. "You're incredible." Ethan's heart skipped, but he stayed steady. "Thanks for coming," he said. Jake hesitated, then added, "I called off the wedding." Ethan froze, his breath catching. "Why?" he asked, afraid to hope. Jake's smile was sad but real. Because it wasn't me. I need to figure out who I am first. They stepped outside, the night air cool against their skin. Jake's hand brushed Ethan's, and for the first time, Ethan didn't pull away. I don't know what this means, Jake said, his voice low. But I want you in my life. Ethan. Always. Ethan nodded, tears in his eyes. It wasn't a promise. Not yet. But it was enough. The sauna had been a crucible, burning away their masks, forcing them to face their truths. Ethan had found his, and Jake was searching for his. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Years later, Ethan would think back to that night in the sauna, the heat and the fear and the hope. It haunted him still, not as a wound, but as a reminder of the courage it took to be honest. He'd left Willow Creek eventually, chasing his art in a city where he could be himself. Jake visited often, their bond deeper, undefined but unbroken. They'd both found freedom, not in answers, but in the questions they dared to ask. And that was enough.